In today's video, I'll be running through an easy method for focus stacking a landscape photo, plus how I avoid focus stacking altogether. So if you're not familiar with focus stacking is where we blend several images together to get sharp focus from front to back of the photo when we just can't do it in one photo. We just don't have enough depth of field. It's absolutely beautiful down here this evening. Sky is a little bit bland though, but we do have some nice light on those rocks in the background, so I'm hopeful we can make a shot just a bit further down here. There's a few rules I like to think about when working out my depth of field when composing an image. The first is what aperture I'm comfortable stopping down to with the lens I'm currently using. So I would advise testing all of your lenses at different focal lengths to see what aperture the lens starts to soften. Most lenses will get softer the more you close the aperture down, and this is called diffraction. For most of my lenses, I'm completely happy stopping down to about f11. If you're using a full frame camera, this might be f16, but you'll need to test this for yourself with your gear. So having concluded that I'm happy stopping down to f11, this will be the point where I consider focus stacking. So if I compose a scene and I can't get everything sharp from front to back in one shot when shooting at f11, then I'll need to make a few decisions. Do I focus stack or do I recompose the shot? Later in the video, I'll be discussing how to avoid focus stacking, but for now, I'm just going to concentrate on the focus stacking part. Compositionally, I think we're working with what we've got. Pretty bland skies right now, but some nice light hitting the rocks in the far distance, and I've positioned the camera in between these two pillars of rocks here, covered in barnacles and mussels, which is pretty cool. Bit of a rock pool down here in my foreground, which adds a little bit of interest as well. So for this scene here, I just can't get everything sharp from my closest foreground to my furthest background. And because I want to get everything sharp, I'm going to focus stack this shot. Now it is possible to do this without a tripod if your camera's got automated focus stacking built into it, but it's a bit hit and miss, I've found, so I do prefer to use a tripod when focus stacking. Now, whenever I'm focus stacking, I'm thinking about taking as few shots as I possibly can, as this is going to make the post-processing stage easier. The more photos that we've got to blend, the more work it's going to be. So I'm going to choose f11, as this will give me the largest depth of field that I'm happy shooting with on these lenses. And then I'm going to take a shot focused on my furthest background object and see where the depth of field starts to fall away. I do this by taking a test shot and zooming into the image and checking where it starts to get soft. So where it gets soft is my next point of focus, and this will give me sufficient overlap as the depth of field will increase beyond that point as well as in front of it. Take that shot, then again check where my image starts to get soft. If my foreground is good, then I'm good. If not, I repeat these steps until I eventually end up with a sharp foreground. By following this technique every time I focus stack an image, I'm always confident that I've got everything that I need when I'm out in the field. Basically what I've done is I've focused on my rocks in the background, which has got that beautiful light catching it, and I've inspected my file and I've found that about 2 meters is where my focus falls away. It starts to get a little bit softer. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on that point just there, a couple of meters away from the camera, and that'll give me depth of field further than this rocks and also right through to my nearest foreground interest right down here with these mussels. So that's pretty cool. I don't think I need to worry too much about the corners. I might just crop the edges of the frame anyway. But yeah, I think that works. 2 frames, f11, 30th a second, ISO 125, 2-second timer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and grab my first image on the background, and then focusing on those rocks just there. Take my second image and just review that last image just to make sure my foreground is nice and sharp, and it is. I'm at about 20 mil. So let's quickly process these images and then we'll come back here to talk about how we can avoid focus stacking altogether. So here we are in Lightroom and I've run a quick edit on these images, nothing too drastic. I'm not going to go through that. I want to keep this focused on the focus stacking part. And yeah, basically the first image we've got here is one where we focus on the background. And then if I come and zoom in here, you can see that the focus starts to fall away just here on these rocks. And then when we get down into the corner, it's very, very soft. And then if we look at the other image, we can see that the background is very, very soft. And then when we come down to the foreground, that's nice and sharp. So really what we need to do is just blend those images together. Like I've mentioned, I've edited these photographs. I simply did an edit and then synchronized the edit to the other photograph to make sure they're both exactly the same. Because when we're in the field, everything was the same. All of our settings were in manual mode. That includes a white balance and all of our other settings to make sure nothing changes in between the photos. And that means when we come back to editing, the post-processing stage, when we apply an edit to the first image, we can simply paste those edits to the second one. Super simple, just highlight both of them by holding Shift and then click Synchronize. I'm not going to do that because I've already done it. So the next stage is to take these images into Photoshop. So I'm going to right click on them when they're both highlighted, come up to Edit In and Open as Layers in Photoshop. And Photoshop will do its thing, open these layers in Photoshop for us. So the first step we need to do before we do anything else is to align these layers. So I want to highlight both the layers by holding Shift and come up to Edit and come down to Auto Align Layers. Click on OK, and that's going to align those two layers. So if there's any type of movement between the shots, Photoshop will align them to make the blending process seamless, so we don't have any ghosting or weird artifacts going on when we paint away that top layer. So we're going to highlight my top layer, and I'm simply going to add a layer mask to that top layer by clicking on the layer mask option. As you can see, it's painted a white layer mask onto that. Now, that's not done anything to our image. What we need to do is grab the brush. We can do that by pressing B or clicking on the brush and the tools panel and making sure we've got black paint selected and our opacity is at 100%. I normally use a soft-ish edged brush, and I'm going to click on the layer mask and I'm simply going to paint away the top layer to reveal the sharp foreground in the image below. And it really is as simple as that. As you can see, that's where our black paint is on our layer mask, and that is revealing the layer below. So it's revealing the sharpness below. If we come into the image now, we can see that this is nice and sharp here, and this is also nice and sharp. Obviously you can fine tune it. You might want to just bring that in a little bit more, but yeah, you get the idea. So we've got a sharp photo from front to back now. Simply all I need to do now is flatten the image and then click on Save, and that will take this saved image back into Lightroom, into our catalogue. Then we can continue to edit it if required. Like I mentioned before, I try to do my focus stacking in 2 photographs if I can, because it's so much easier when you get to the post-processing stage. But sometimes it's not possible to do that. You might have 3 or 4, and you just need to repeat the process that I did here, but you'll have multiple layers stacked on top of each other, and you'll just be painting through the layer below until you get to your foreground. It's more time consuming, it's a little bit more tricky to keep a tabs on exactly what's going on, but you know, it is doable. But yeah, that's why I shoot at f11 to make sure I've got the most amount of depth of field I can with each image, which means I've got more chance of doing it in 2 shots. So I was flicking through my zine to see how many images in here were focus stacked, and to my surprise there was only 2, but actually I did focus stack this one here in the field, but when I got back to post-production I decided against it because I quite like the way that the depth of field fold away into the background and it helps soften the transition between the foliage and the light. So I decided not to focus stack that when I reviewed the images in post-processing. This image here is a focus stack. I focused on the log and the gate to make sure I could get everything sharp from front to back. And again, this one here with the bluebells, this was shot I think around about 50mm from memory, and I wanted to make sure that I got the bluebells sharp and these tree trunks in the center because they were an integral part of the composition. I wanted to make sure they were tack sharp. So yeah, 2 images out of 48. So I definitely try to avoid focus stacking at all costs if I possibly can, as I much prefer to get the image in one shot. Anyway, let's talk about some considerations I go through when I'm trying to avoid focus stacking. So the focus stacking process is fairly simple, but I have to say I actually prefer not to focus stack at all. And to do this, I've got a few considerations to go through when composing my image. Firstly, focal length is a major factor for how deep our depth of field is. So the more zoomed in, the less depth of field we're going to have. The second is camera position. The closer we are to the closest foreground elements within our scene, the more depth of field will be required. So it's a balancing act between these two to see if it's possible to get the desired composition from a particular location. So the wider we are, the more depth of field we have. So if I'm shooting with this 9mm lens here in my Fuji system, this will get me a sharp image from front to back from about 40 centimeters to infinity, so a massive depth of field. And that's if I focus on the hyperfocal distance. Typically, hyperfocal focusing will give you the largest depth of field. So focusing at the hyperfocal distance will be the best option if you're really struggling to get everything sharp from front to back. Now, I don't use this lens here that much on my 40 megapixel camera because it's not that sharp, but it does have a depth of field scale, which is really handy for me to be able to show you how hyperfocal distance focusing works. So you can see here that I've got my aperture set to f11. And if I set my infinity marker at f11, we can see on the other side at f11 that everything will be acceptably sharp down to about 0.4 meters or 16 inches. The black line in the middle shows the hyperfocal distance, or the length at which we're focused, which is about 0.8 meters roughly. This means everything from 0.4 meters to infinity should be acceptably sharp when focused at 0.8 meters. If you don't have a depth of field scale on your lens or camera, you can use apps such as photo pills to tell you the optimum point of focus. But what I do is focus about a third of the way into the scene, take a test shot and review the image to see how it looks. I then adjust it if I need to. And I found this works pretty well most of the time. Another thing to note is we don't always need to have everything sharp in the photo. I mean, we don't see everything completely sharp with our own eyes, do we? Quite often in the woodland, for example, if we've got our depth of field falling slightly away in the background, it can actually help us to soften maybe a chaotic area that's, more distracting, if you like. So that could work in our favour. Also, I think it's fine to have a little softness in the foreground if it helps to tell the story or maybe isolate a subject. It's all a bit of a balancing act really, isn't it? And the outcome is always down to the individual photographer's idea for the image in the first place. Now, while focusing is a critical part of composing a photo, there's also quite a few things that we should try to avoid as landscape photographers, which is why I highly recommend checking out the video that's up here. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the like button and please consider subscribing for future content like this. Until next week, guys, take care and I'll see you soon.